Hello, I'm Lucy from Cruickshanks and I'm here today with my review of Circe by Madeline Miller. Scott and I have decided that on our channel we want to pick one book every month that is a book that's getting loads of exposure, that's getting loads of people talking about it, loads of reviews, loads and loads of hype, and we're going to read it and see whether we think it lives up to that level of coverage that it is getting, really. And the book that we chose to do this month is Circe by Madeline Miller. Now, this is Madeline Miller's second novel, and her debut was The Song of Achilles. And when that came out, it took the world a little bit by storm, didn't it? It won the Orange Prize in the UK, or the Orange Prize as it was then. It was a huge international bestseller. I think it's been translated into something like 25 languages. So by all accounts, it was a stonkingly good book. One, I have to admit though, I haven't read, but it meant that this book obviously has been getting loads of hype and anticipation. So it's kind of in a similar vein. So it is a retelling of Greek mythology, just like the Song of Achilles, from a perspective that is not sort of the most common perspective. So in this novel, that happens to be Circe. Now, she is the daughter of the great Greek god of the sun, Helios. But when she is born, even though her parents are gods, she doesn't seem to have any sort of godlike features. She certainly doesn't have any power. She doesn't have the beauty that all the other female gods have. Her voice is actually the voice of a mortal, and that is incredibly distasteful for the rest of the gods. They don't like that at all. And as a result, she is instantly this outsider. Nobody sort of wants to interact with her. Nobody gives her the time of day. They're outright just plain horrible to her, really. Even her parents and her siblings, they whisper behind her back. They say terrible things to her face, and they are generally vile. And Circe is this sort of really meek character, and she just takes it all on board, and she soaks it up in the beginning, and she's unhappy, but she doesn't do anything about it, to the point actually where at the beginning of the novel I sort of was thinking, gosh, she's so meek and she has so little agency and drive. Why are we kind of reading about her? I didn't feel excited to be listening to her story to start with, because it was so relentlessly bleak, I think, to start with. But then she finds herself in a love triangle, and she is of course the very bluntest point of this triangle, but she does something really dramatic and really drastic and terrible in the eyes of the other gods, and she lands herself banished by Zeus, and her father is complicit in her banishment, and she ends up exiled for all eternity, because gods are of course immortal, on this desert island, which actually I think sounded rather fantastic. And to start with, actually, she quite likes it too, because for the first time in her life, she's on her own and she's learning to be independent, and she hasn't got everyone ridiculing her and watching over her shoulder. And what happens is she sort of starts to discover that she may not have these sort of divine godly powers, but she is able to do sorcery, and she is some sort of witch, and she sort of teaches herself witchcraft on this island. And the book is overall her story, really, of discovering who she is. It is not a book with a fast-paced cause and effect type of plot. So there isn't one event that leads into another, that leads into another, that leads into another, that threads through the entire novel, but instead there is the story of Circe's life. So after her banishment, really, the people that she encounters as sort of the sailors that sort of stumble across her island that she interacts with, good and bad, the lovers that she has throughout the ages, her journey into sort of really uncomfortable, unexpected motherhood, the interactions that she has with her family, her parents and her siblings after her banishment, and how they influence her, and how she sort of tries to deal with her sort of a past family relationship. So the plot is set really sort of epically over thousands of years as she's coming to terms and dealing with all these things. So I guess you could kind of call it a coming of age story, really, in a way. And so whilst I didn't feel that I could get behind Circe when we first met her because she was so meek, you get to know her enough through all these things that happen in her life that you can by the end. And I did really, really like her, and I did root for her. And it's also worth saying that although there isn't this sort of fast-paced cause and effect type of plot, this is actually a very cleverly plotted book, because all the sort of things that are planted at the beginning that you sort of don't really think are consequential in terms of the overall story, they do come full circle, and Madeline Miller does go back and tie up all these loose ends that you almost didn't realise you were waiting for her to tie up. And I particularly enjoyed that, the way that she neatly wrapped things up at the end. It was a very satisfying read, even though I generally prefer things to have sort of a more defined plot. That said, overall, there were lots of things I did like about this book, but there were some that I didn't like quite so much. I already mentioned Circe's character at the start of the novel, because she was so sort of a little bit pathetic. But also at the start, there were other things that stopped me getting headlong into this novel. One of which was the density of Greek mythology, I guess, really. So I don't really know very much about Greek mythology. I know who Zeus is. I know who Athena is. I read the Odyssey and the Iliad a very, very long time ago. I'm not entirely sure I enjoyed them all that much. I couldn't remember much at all. And you're thrown into this book and you are given so many names of Greek gods, and there are so many sort of references to other stories and things like that I found it a bit overwhelming. I couldn't initially keep track of all the people. I didn't really know who I should be investing in, who was going to sort of keep with us all the way through the story. I knew that I was missing references to other stories, and I've read a couple of reviews, I've seen a couple of other things about this book where people have said, you know, I knew I was missing things, but it didn't really bother me. I could still totally enjoy it. And I agree with that statement to an extent, but not wholeheartedly, because I kind of liken it to you know, you're going on a night out with a group of people who you don't know very well, but they all know each other really, really well. And you can still have a thoroughly good evening, but you know you're missing the in-jokes, and it kind of still leaves you feeling a little bit flat. So whilst I would say you can enjoy this book if you don't know anything about Greek mythology, it, for me, made it a little bit more challenging, especially at the start, to keep track of people. And I do feel like I would have got more out of it if I knew more of the references and more of the stories that they were talking about. Something I did really like about the book was the overarching themes which it addressed, actually. So in particular, there were sort of two themes that Circe kept coming back to at different points in her life and different times in her sort of emotional journey. And the first was that if you do not like the situation the fates deal you, change it. So do something about it. So she learns that actually she is master of her own destiny, even though all the gods and all the fates and everything is telling her that life must be a certain way. And even though she is banished, there is still so much that she can do to control her situation and better her lot. And I loved that message that ran through it. the second message that sort of keeps coming back as well is that you are not your blood. So Circe's family are pretty wretched to her. All the gods seem pretty wretched to everyone and each other all the time, but they're particularly wretched to Circe. And initially, she still feels bound to them because they are her blood, and she learns actually that they do not define her, and the other characters around her as well too, as she sort of befriends mortals more and more along the way. They all sort of together learn that they can be their own people and in control of their destinies, and their lives are not there to be defined by their blood, and their personalities and their strengths and their weaknesses are not reflective of where they have come from. And so I really liked that message that ran through it too. That said, I did feel there were a few places where the novel sort of had emotional lulls, I guess, really, because when I was thinking about this, it kind of comes from the fact that she was banished. And that means that no matter how great a heroine Madeline Miller has created in this novel, there is still times, great periods of time, hundreds of years of time, when she is on her own on this island. And so there's only so much, I felt, that Miller could do with her emotions. So when, in the periods where Circe is interacting with other people, so her family and her lovers and later on her son, you know, it's really emotionally charged and it's really powerful, and I was totally there for it. But the periods where she's on her own for a long time and just sort of reflecting, she doesn't have anyone to bounce her emotions off. She doesn't have anyone to sort of cause her to have emotions other than sort of loneliness, really. And so I felt that in those places, parts of the novel, there was not sort of the high emotion and it wasn't as compelling as it was in other places. Another thing that I did really like about the novel though, which kind of is related to that point, so it's a little bit weird that I'm saying it's got good bits and bad bits, but actually was the scope of the novel and the variety within it. So Madeline Miller is really ambitious, and she's got these sort of quieter periods, which when they were sort of shorter, I did like them a lot. And sort of, so these sort of bits of lonely reflecting, and also when she first has her son, she is just gripped by this, you know, fear of new motherhood that's really relatable. And sort of these are quiet moments. There's this fantastic bit where she's sort of had a terrible day with this baby that won't stop crying, even though she's a god, and she is just sort of standing over his cot weeping and saying, you know, tomorrow I will do better, I promise I will. And those quiet moments are really great, actually, especially when you contrast them with the really brutal high drama moments that come elsewhere in this book. There are two really brutal, quite kind of graphic and extreme birth scenes in this novel, which are definitely not for pregnant women of a weak constitution or a nervous disposition. They are really sort of extreme, and when they stand contrasted with those quieter moments, I think it works really well, and it actually paces the book really well as well, because you can't keep up either of those sort of styles for long periods, I think. So I think Madeline Miller has done a brilliant job of balancing those out. And actually, I've just thought, one other thing that I really liked about this was actually, even though it's sort of set in ancient Greece and is all about mythology, there's like this contemporary resonance that Miller manages to stuff in there really cleverly, and the motherhood thing is one of them, actually. So she makes it really relevant, and you know, you can sort of feel this modern sort of relatability to this god who is really truly nothing like us at all. And there's all these moments where that happens, and I think it's really great. The other thing that I generally liked was the way it was written, so the language. I thought that generally Madeline Miller was really skillful in the way that she wrote. there are beautiful descriptions running through it. There's one where she describes Odysseus, where Circe describes Odysseus as a spiral shell. So there's all these bits of his personality that are just beyond the curve that you just can't see. And I really loved that. There's another bit, I think, about trying to remember one of her lover's faces as she says goodbye, trying to imprint it onto her memory, like pressing a seal into wax. And I just thought the moments like that when she wrote were really, really brilliant. It did occasionally slip for me into a little bit melodrama. So the writing got just a little bit too much, I felt sometimes. And I know that they're talking about the gods, so I think if you can ever get away with melodrama, it's probably in a book about the gods. But sometimes it just felt pushed a little bit too far to me. And similarly, sometimes it got a little bit repetitive when she was talking about the gods, because so Helios is the sun god. We know that he glows golden. There's only so many ways to describe a golden glow, and that's true of kind of all the gods. There's only so many ways to describe their sort of aura, I guess, their godly aura. And I did feel that when those descriptions went on a little too long, they did start repeating themselves for me. But generally, really, really beautifully written. So overall, I thought that this was actually a really enjoyable read. I think it's one that people actually may be a little bit divided on. Unfortunately, I haven't read The Song of Achilles. I really wish I'd read The Song of Achilles so I could say I had a point of comparison, really, so I can check the hype on this book, I guess, to know whether this is as good, whether it's better, whether it has not really lived up to the expectations. I would love to know, because I feel like some people are gonna love this book and others are not gonna have the patience for sort of the purple prose and the sometimes meandering plot and things like that. So I'm sort of really interested to see whether this book takes off in the same way that The Song of Achilles did. But for me, I thought it was a good read. I enjoyed it. I didn't think it was a mind-blowingly great read. It's not going to be in my all-time favourites, but I'm glad that I read it, and I'm glad in a way that it kind of exists, and that sort of the great stories of sort of Greek mythology are sort of being updated and brought to new audiences. So I kind of like I like that it exists anyway, even if it was not going to be probably my favourite book of the year. Well, it's not, because it's not already, but it's a good read. I almost forgot. I just need to show you how beautiful this book is in the buff. Look at this book. It's so pretty. Oh no, it's stuck. Look, shiny. And also, for those of you who like a map, it's got a map, a really, really nice map. And I've also just remembered, one other thing that's worth saying is I saw Rincey Reads over on her YouTube channel doing a review of this book, and she had a different edition. I think she's in the US, so she had the US edition. I've got the UK edition. And she said that at the back of her book, there was like a little summary of who the Greek people were, who the Greek gods were, and what happened in all their little stories. Just a brief one. And that's not in my copy. Bloomsbury. That would have been really, really helpful. UK versions, we'd like that in any future prints, please. That would be helpful. So anyway, there you have it. Beautiful, beautiful book. I would really love to know if you've read this book already, or if you're planning to read it. I would especially love to know if you have read The Song of Achilles, and you can tell me what you think of that and how it compares. That is something I would love to chat about. So please do talk to me in the comments below. In the meantime, check out bookacts.com. I'll be back next week with a video. Anyway, we'll be back next week with a video, and we'll see you soon. Thanks for watching.